All right. Hopefully you guys can see my screen now.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, let's see how you want to do this, Dilip.
Yeah, it's kind of just what I wanted to do it is essentially go probably a section by section, Harshal.
Okay.
To see it if they have any specific questions. So if like it's first thing I want to find out is making sure all of you had an opportunity to like it's kind of a read through the two documents that we mentioned about it.
Okay.
So let's go past the index.
Okay. Hey, Dilip, I forgot to mention here, we have two new faces here. I was hoping they can introduce themselves quickly for a minute. Swapnali, you here?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Yeah, Swapnali, can you just talk about yourself, see what your interest is in the QA camp and what your goal is?
Okay, currently I've been working as a substitute teacher with Olentangy High Schools and Olentangy Schools, but I'm looking forward as a QA. My past background is computer science, and I had been a lecturer for almost 7 years. I had been teaching lots of subjects, but not as a QA. So I'm interested to know mostly what is right now going on in the market and more about the interviews, how to crack them. These are my main interest. So I'm here for this camp.
All right, so you are getting right to the point, Swapnali. Crack the interviews, and so there is no secret. Work hard. That's all it takes. Okay. Let me see if there's one more. Yeah, go ahead, Dilip.
So Swapnali, you said that you've been teaching other subjects. Can you tell me a little bit about what subjects in computer science or the others that you were referring it?
Okay, I have been teaching, I was teaching microprocessor 8085, a little bit of data communication, a little bit of networking, Visual C++, C++, then quantitative techniques, a large way of doing it on practicals using Skylab. This is another language. So yeah, but I'm not in touch with this all things for almost maybe 9 to 10 years. This was before 9 to 10 years. After that, I've been just trottling over the globe. Singapore, 2 years, UK, 2 years, and now US, almost 7 years.
Okay.
That's great.
That gives me a good understanding in terms of the background. So thank you for that.
Yep. We also have Jeff here. Jeff, can you introduce yourself?
How you doing? I'm Jeff. I have a background in information systems, and I came up to join Intellect just to get more knowledge in the QA field, and like the lady previously, just to crack through the interviews and get a good career job out of it as well.
Okay.
Okay, great. Great. And Jeff, you are based in Cincinnati. Is that correct?
I'm based in Cincinnati, yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Okay. All right. Sounds great. And hopefully you guys can. I think Swapnali will be attending in the classroom, and Jeff will be attending online. So hopefully you guys can meet other students as well.
Okay.
All right. Let's get back to here.
Okay, so let me ask Jeff, you and Swapnali a quick question. Did you had an opportunity to look at the video recording of session 1, or are you guys coming in completely cold for today?
So I got a chance to be able to review that.
Okay, how about you, Swapnil?
Swapnali, yep. I have completed the video, so I just skipped the starting part, and I found the last part where you have actually explaining the problem, the business problem and all. That was more interesting. So yes, I did completed the video, but I couldn't go through the whole thing from page, it was 7 to 77 or something. but I could relate it to DFDs, data flow diagrams, and the way we used to do earlier.
Okay.
So, but I
Right.
won't say that I have not got the system completely. So I won't be able, if you ask me any question, I may need some time to get through this.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that both of you had a context as we start talking through it. Specifically, like it's if you read through the problem statement, that is what I was kind of like, it's looking forward for it. Okay, so that definitely helps it. So class, let's get started. So Harshal, if you can like just scroll down to probably the first section, the overview statement.
Yep.
Okay, so this one should fairly be familiar, right? Because we reviewed that in the class while we were talking about the business problem where they are focusing on increase in the market share. So let's go to 1.1. And the way I want to do it is to say if you have any specific question, then we'll go over it. And if you don't have any questions, then I'm going to assume that like as you understood that and we can move forward. So any questions on the assumptions or anything about Windows Azure platform? Okay, everybody's quiet. So understand in what platform and environment this is supposed to operate. So let's go forward, Herschel, on the context diagram then.
Okay.
Okay, so let me ask anybody from the class who can walk me through it and tell me what did they learn it from this context tree diagram?
Hi, this is Anita.
Hey, Anita.
I understood like it's the interaction between the system and users, how they like interact, they send, like it's an input and output, like a data flow or information diagram, maybe.
Yeah, I would not consider this more as a data flow, but like as you talked about, it's interactions the different users have with the system. So can you walk me through it? Like it's as you read the rest of the document, how do you see the interaction happening between the dealer and Arfloan and like the whole path for the context?
Dealers will go to Arfloan.com and like first actually understood like first agents will create the dealers and dealers account and lenders account, everything. After that, dealers will log into the Arfloan.com and they will log into the Arfloan.com and dealer users, they will go to the loan calculation, payment calculation. Then they will submit credit applications. Then credit application notification will go to lenders, and the lenders will approve or reject, or and after that, like that notification will go to the dealers, and like also the loan review reports will be they can run the loan review reports, dealers.
Yeah, so I think it's you got the gist, right? It's essentially that's how the transaction or interaction will flow the system. In most of those, if you look into the detail that was specified into the overview section of how that entire interaction happens. So it's an important to understand that context, because as you go through the rest of the document, you understand at what stage each of the requirements come into the picture. So any questions anybody else had it on the context diagram?
I think initial, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When I was looking at the overview problem statement, and I look at the A when it says that customer will come into the into shop for auto repair. So I was thinking, looking at the diagram, context diagram, I thought I was probably going to see a customer first. Like I thought the customer set the process going. But so initially that was what I was thinking. But then later on, I kind of understood it. But in my mind, I thought I would see customer first, because since it's the problem statement states customer will come into the shop, and I thought the customer sets the ball rolling. Because if the customer doesn't come, there won't be the process. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yes. So if you think about it, right, that's entire process.
Yeah.
Versus what you're seeing in the context diagram is how the user is going to interact with the system, right?
Yeah.
So what you looked at earlier was the entire business process, entire business context,
Okay.
right? And some of the steps is going to be happening in the business outside the bounds of the system, and certain things is going to happen within the system. So whenever you're going to look into the system context diagram, you're going to see it only purely from a systems point of view, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So for example, as you mentioned, right, the customer will come to the dealer side and dealer log in into that. That's probably not going to be at all happening inside system, right? It's probably going to be outside the system. So the first time dealer will interact it is when customer says, hey, I can't pay this the amount that you're talking about for the maintenance. Do I have an opportunity to loan? That's when they will just go and say, okay, if I know how much loan amount is going to, let me give you the estimate of what will be the monthly payment.
Yeah.
And if that makes sense, then we will just go proceed with the credit application.
Okay. I get it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's go with the next diagram. Herschel.
Okay.
So can anybody else explain me what did they understood when they look at the functional decomposition diagram?
It's okay if it's wrong, but go ahead and try, give it a shot. What your understanding is.
Oh, okay. I think when I look at the diagram, my understanding is that Arfloan is the center of all this dealers or all these interactions. So it's, I don't know if I can use the word, it's a platform that everything takes place from there and also ends there. Like that's what I got from it. So all these dealers report to Arfloan.com. It's the main resources, or is the main platform that all this managers dealing everybody will end up with Arfloan.com.
Okay. So, sort of, yes, but I want you guys to think it a little bit differently, right? Okay. So in the class, we talked about the Amazon.com example, right? So let's say if you have an account at Amazon, so when you go to the Amazon.com's website, there are multiple different functions that you can do it, right? So one thing you can do it is you can manage your profile. The other thing you can do it is you manage your orders. The third thing you can do it is kind of like it's view what all products are available for to purchase from Amazon. Then they may also even have a section called Prime Video or your shipping and billing address and so on. So any system that you think about it, right, it's going to comprise of multiple functional components. And what this diagram just shows that is that, hey, Arfloan is basically broken down into 7 different functional components, right? One component which is kind of geared towards managing the dealers, right? So this is where typically all of your area agent and Arfloan agents will work to like sign up the dealers. Then you have another component called managing users. So this is where all the user management, whether it's a dealer, user, lender user, or even to the extent where Arfrep or area manager, those are different users of the systems will get managed. Then similar to dealer, you have a lender management function. Then the next 3, it's essentially the key functional aspect, right? Which is, hey, how I'm going to perform the loan calculations. And then what is the process to submit the credit application versus approval or reject. And then finally, as you look into it, system will generate reports that can be utilized by dealers, or it could be utilized by your area managers or Arfloan reps. So when you think about holistically, Arfloan.com, it's a one big system, but that itself can be broken down into specific subcomponents, which takes care of each of the functional. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Marshall,
Yep.
let's then go to the next module.
Yeah, and if you don't understand, feel free to ask the question. Okay, that's the only way you're gonna learn it. If you have more question it generates, it might help somebody else as well. So, okay.
Okay. Now let's talk about the business process module, right? So can somebody walk me through it? And like, it's when you read this section, what came to your mind? What did you understood, or what this section help you to get more understanding around the system?
Can I do it?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is come under manage dealer shops. So basically, they are different functional group, and this particular functional group is working towards the dealers, and so they are going to hire some representative. They are going to agents. Agents are going to sign up new dealers on the website arfloan.com, and that's what happens after. So their work is the signing up the dealers. And once they sign up the dealers, dealers can like people from dealer shops, they can log into the arfloan.com, and they can able to start financing the loan and its functionalities depending on the repair systems. And so for that, here is the process business rule. All dealers shall be assigned. They are going to assign a unique franchise number during the setup. So with that number, system can understand this is the particular dealer shop they are talking about. And they can track also the data for that particular dealer too in the data section. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So the you can see, go under the first column, you can see data attributes, and the second is CRUD, CRUD, which is a create, read, update, and delete. So, and the source and the example. So you can see the different data attributes is a dealer's name. So this particular group is going to set up the dealer thing under all this tabs, or the information: dealer's name, franchise number, address, phone number, contact number, is it active or not, so active, inactive, dead, shop type, what kind of a shop they are having, and types of repair, numbers of employee, and which representative, which one is taking care of it, and the regional manager from the Arfloan. So all this kind of data is going under this manage dealer shops.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's fairly good description, people, of what is happening, right? So when you think about it, every business is going to have some process. Remember, we talked about as part of process improvement, the business is going to have some process that they are using it. So this particular section 2.3 talks about which are the processes which are going to be interacting with the systems. And what it talks about is at what point that process gets started. And once that process is successfully executed, what happens to the system, right? So it's almost like it's interaction points to the system. And then the business rules identify what are the constraints it's going to be involved in that process interacting with the systems, right? So for example, The first one, which talks about, hey, it's not just enough that I'm going to sign up the dealer, but every time a dealer is signed up, they're going to generate a unique franchise number as part of that setup that then becomes an identity of that dealer in the system. Okay. And then, as you pointed out rightly, right, the data section talks about what kind of information it's going to be interacted during this process and captured into the system. Okay. And then you will see similar pattern for all the business processes, right? Where you're going to see it essentially, what is the name of the process, how it gets kicked off, what happens after the process is successfully executed, what are the business constraint or business process rules are, and then what kind of data elements that it interacts with it.
Yep.
So that's going to be a fairly standard template for you to give an understanding across all the processes in the system. Okay. So Arshal, if you can just scroll it down to 232.
Yeah, go
Quick
ahead.
question.
Yes, Kobe.
So I understand what you're saying, but my question is, so what is John and Jerry? What do you mean? What does it mean as provider?
So as you collect those requirements, there might be interaction. So this is essentially the provider is essentially keeping a track of, hey, who provided me this requirement? So as you go through it and you said, hey, you know what, this is not very clear. I need some additional information. So this gives you a tracking mechanism to go back to the person who provided so that you can have a conversation and get the clarification that you need around it. And same thing, it's with the source and example section in the data attributes, right? The source could be, hey, what system is providing the data, or who is going to enter it, or as part of the requirement, who identified that I need to capture this element.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any other question? Anybody else?
I have a question. In this data attribute table, there is a last row with the dots and CRUD. So is that valid, like to give like the to mention like that?
So let's go back, right? So Anita, if you think about it, right? One of the question that we had as we read through the requirement is to make sure, did we apply the 3C and a T, right? So when somebody gives you information like this, dot, well, what does that mean to you as a quality assurance person?
Incomplete?
What did you understood?
Incomplete.
Incomplete, right? So it tells you there is some additional data that may be captured along with it, but they didn't provide that information right here. So you need to probably look at to say, did they provide that information anywhere else? So in other words, is it complete? And if it's not complete, then that's the perfect where you can ask it, say, hey, wait a minute, we need to get more information back from the user as to about what all other data that they capture it at the time of creating or managing or updating the dealership. So does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So this is a perfect example where you flagged it and say, hey, you know what? When I look at the dealership management requirements, it's incomplete and I don't have all that.
Okay.
Now, you read the whole document, right? Did you find anywhere else in the document that had provided that information? Did anybody else find it anywhere else, the information? Or...
Sorry, I was talking in mute.
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Yes, go ahead.
Going forward in the system design documents, like I see more information there.
Right. So that's another example, right? When we talked about it, hey, there is a consistency aspect and completeness aspect. So even though the requirement is not completely flushed out and defined here in the requirement specification document, they did went ahead and then flushed out that in the system design document, right? So one of the key things that you need to validate is all that information that's provided in the system design document. Is it consistent with what is provided here? And is it completing that requirement? Right. So for example, like you have a dealer name, franchise number, address, and all. You have to look into the system requirements system design specification document to say, hey, are they capturing all this information for the dealer or not, right? If they're missing some there, and then we know that a portion of the requirement is missing here, or if there is any inconsistency, that's another opportunity where you can sit down with the end users and say, wait a minute, I still don't have a clarity. Can you help me understand what all data that you're capturing? Okay. That's a good observation though. Marshall, if you can scroll to 232. Now, as I mentioned, right? So if you look into the section 231 and 232, it follows more or less kind of the same pattern, which talks about what is the description, when does it kicks on, what happens after the process is complete, what are the business rules, and towards the end, it talks about what are the data elements that it's capturing. Now, another key difference here in the detailed description that you see is a table, right? So it is talking about, hey, who all are the different users it's going to be as when you try to manage. But also, if you recall it, in the functional decomposition, it was talked about that, hey, the system is going to be broken down into 6 different modules. And who is going to have access to what kind of functionality in the system. So if you can think about it, it provides you both security and authentication model of how it's going to work in the system. So when I read through this, I can say, hey, if I am kind of created a super user type of user into the system, they will be able to access all the functionality with the exception of approval and denying credit applications. Okay. Versus when I look into it, the dealer can manage everything but the managing the other dealers and approving or denying credit application. And then when you look into the business process rule 2.1, it talks about who can manage what kind of users, because you have a manage users, which is everybody but the lender can access that function.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to figure it out now. Who can manage what kind of users? Okay.
So Dilip, I have a question. Who can be a super user? So any example?
So typically, super users are the people who are going to have elevated privileges in your system. So those who are probably a system administrator who are managing the entire Arfloan.com, or people who would be probably some of them might be working at the Arfloan.com company itself,
Okay.
who are an important business users who needs to have access to all the functionality of the system.
Okay.
Did you guys figure out difference between super user and site administrator?
So I think site administrator basically manages the website or everything that has to do with the online with offline.com.
Okay.
So when you say site administrator manages the site, then what does super user do it?
Wouldn't the difference have to do with their privileges?
Okay. So this is where you got to be careful, and like it's talk about, remember we talked about 3C condition, and one of them is talking about the consistency. So this is an example where they have named the exact same role into two different names. One is called super user, other one is site administrator, but they are one and same.
Oh.
Okay, so that's where you should start asking clarification question, because the first thing I would kind of notice it if the business process rule talks about site administrator, but when I look at the table above in the description, there is nobody called site administrator, right?
Yes.
So that should trigger you a question and says, wait a minute, guys, is it a missing information or is it inconsistent? Make sense? So think about it, right? If you thought that, hey, those two are two different roles, and you go ahead and implement those things in the system, there's a lot of work that you did it, right? And there is no clarity in terms of, hey, what exactly site administrator is responsible for versus what its super users. And if you're putting one and same, then did you really need to create two different tag names for the different types of user?
No.
You could save all of that work. You could save a whole bunch of issues that might have generated with that. Had you just had that question and got clarity, hey, they're one and same. So that when you read the rest of the documents, or whether it's a design document, or even some of the detailed system or functional requirements, now you know that, hey, they are one and same.
Okay.
Any other question?
On this particular 232.
Also, they didn't mention about reports in the process business rule. Yeah, like
okay,
for example,
so that's a good observation, right? So the reports is talk about from the functionality access module point of view.
Yeah, 2.4.
Right, but when you talk about the process business rules, you don't have to have a one-on-one mapping with the description. What the description about is just kind of give you in a table about who should have what kind of access. But if you look into it, there is no detail in terms of, hey, what should report contain? What should submitting a credit application functionality contain? What should loan calculation contain, right? All it talks about a specific segment in the context of managing users, what is important. Because in context of managing reports, it's not an important of what should contain within those reports. Now, there may be clarity that may have it and says, hey, does the dealer reports are same as in our Arfloan reports, or there's going to be a difference in report depending on what my user role is. That should then trigger you to review in the document is that, hey, is there any specific section which talks about those reports? So those goes back to the completeness, right? Do they have specified anything? So when you read it in the document, did you see anywhere where they specified what reports looks like and who should be able to do what kind of reporting? If you guys are talking on mute, probably.
No, I think
So can I say something here?
Yeah.
If you can go to the 2.7 or yes,
Precisely.
2.7
Right.
and
Yep.
user training and support requirements.
Yeah.
So
you're
you
right.
can see agent has their own report criteria that comes agent's umbrella. And when he goes to dealer, he is going to fill out that criteria. So so other people, other functional system people can see what is he inputting the data. And on the same page, you can see if the agent or representative clicks on the dealer's name, the following information will appear for that particular dealership. I'm just giving you the brief thing here. On the page, next page, you can see area or district manager has a report criteria.
Yeah.
And the same as a regional manager, and report has a he has a particular report criteria. And the super user, or as you mentioned, the site administrator, he or she has a particular report criteria.
Yeah.
So they will have the same exactly similar criteria, but they cannot see the only regional like they cannot manage everybody. Only the highest or the topmost person can manage the rest of the hierarchy people.
So, and that is
comes
the
under
super
that
user?
umbrella.
No, so Kobe, she's referring to it, right? So in the section 2.7, when you look into it, it has all the detailed reporting requirements. And what it indicates it when you read through that section is every person has a little bit of different reporting access. So for example, when you look into it, the way the business model is structured, right? That people at the lowest level, which is ARF rep, are managing at the dealer. But then all of those ARF rep report to their area manager. So let's say, for example, if I have 5 different area rep within the Columbus area, and I may have an area manager for Columbus area. So the manager in that Columbus area should be able to see all of the accomplishments or the transactions generated by each one of the 5 area rep within the Columbus area. And that same model goes up from an area manager to regional manager. You may have somebody assigned at the Ohio region level, and then they may be able to manage everybody within Ohio. So they may be able to do it Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, Toledo, Marysville. There's a whole bunch of different areas that they manage, and they will be able to drill it down further. And for each one of those areas, which of the reps are performing at what level.
Okay.
Right. So that's the scope, right? So typically, like if you think about it, if there are 2 peer at the ARF rep level, they should not be able to see each other's data. They should be able to see only their data.
Oh, okay.
But then there is a reporting hierarchy with the regional managers to ARF rep, right? So as you go up in the food chain, you are able to see it, everybody that is part of your food chain.
Okay.
It's just like a standard sales hierarchy, right? In the any organization has it.
Right.
So, because I was looking for 2.7, I didn't see no 2.7.
We'll go to the 2.7.
Let's continue here, right?
Yep.
Okay.
What I was kind of referring it is when you read through the document, you're not necessarily always going to read through sequential, right? If you have a question, hey, I don't see the detail here. Do they have that information anywhere else in the document or not? That's the mindset that when you go through it, that you need to look through it.
Okay.
Right. And people may have a different approach, right? I may just make a note and says, I'm going to continue reading here. But Herschel may have a different approach and says, you know what? Let me flag that I'm here. Let me find where else the reporting structure is so that I get a fully understanding before I move to the next section. It's all dependent on individuals of how they consume and process that information. Okay. All right. Herschel, if you can scroll it down to the next one. So the next process is manage lenders. So what I want to talk at this point is like if you have any questions on the rest of the section 2.3, because I think it goes all the way to 2.3.6, but if you look at the structure is the same. So did you have any questions or, hey, Dilip, I didn't understand this, or it may be missing, so it failed 3C and T criteria here. Let's talk through it for the section 2.3.
Okay. So I'm just going to move on to the 235 now. Any question on this particular section?
I have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dhanashree.
So for the source section, what do we have to put on each and every attribute, like the PDF things, or how we do it? Any links?
Again, so remember, like it's you're a recipient of this document, not necessarily you're creating it,
Oh, okay.
right? So you're consuming this information. So they will identify, hey, in this case, right, for the source, they have a document. So they could provide a link or they could provide you, just like what happened here in this document, as attachment, which says that here is the actual credit application that our customers fill it out, or the dealer user in this case fills out.
Okay,
In
so
the
for
system.
each and every attribute, we have to put some source.
No, it's not. You have to put it. There will be information provided. Now, the reason why they put the source in the credit application data field, because it contains so much information. So instead of like it's repeating each one of those steps or each one of the elements into the main document, they just attach it and say, here is the document that has all the information needed for the credit application.
Okay.
Versus when I look into credit application status, well, there is not a lot of detail around it. It's a single attribute or single element. So I may not have to provide that level of detail.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Let's get into any other questions so far?
Okay.
All right. So let's look into the section 2.4 and 2.5. So the section 2.4 talks about, hey, is there any specific additional business rules at the project level that I need to worry about it? Okay. In this case, they don't have any additional business rule. They have defined all of the specific business rule needed in each one of those processes. So there is not a single rule that encompasses that goes across all of the processes. Then when you look into the section 2.5, then it talks about, hey, what type of system access people are going to have it and what functions they're going to be able to do that. So when you look at the table, right, here it is again, the site administrator, the dealer user, the lender user, RFREP users, those are defined and it's detailing it out what functional system category. So if you refer it back to the functional decomposition diagram, it's telling you what all I can access it. And the next one talks about, hey, is there a specific level of the access that I needed to do that? So this is where you would normally go back to, because this information is not the first time that's presented here, right? When you look into the business process, which talks about the managing the users, which is the section 2.2, it had also provided it. So this is where you should look for it. Hey, is the information provided there? In information provided in this section 2.5, are they consistent? If it is not, then you should question it as, hey, wait a minute. You say this particular user should be able to access this type of function here, but when I look in this table, it doesn't have that ability. So what should be it? So this is where you start doing a quality assurance of consistency. It says, is the information provided consistent across the whole document? Did anybody notice any discrepancy between those two?
Delete option is there?
So when you say delete option is there, what do you mean by that?
I mean, in previous tables, there is no delete option. They mention just create, read, and update.
Right. So that's where you should question it, right? So when you look into, Sarshal, if you scroll it down, right? So inside the data attribute, that's where it's all CRUD. It's the only CRU. And if you look into it, that CRUD is more detail level information versus the type of access here. It talks about the function, can I do a delete for that particular level of access? And that's where you captured it, right? And say, hey, you know what? There is an inconsistency. The other one does not allow me to destroy that level of data versus this function says that I have ability to delete it. Well, what does the difference that mean? Right? Specifically in case of, let's say, running the report. And if you say I can delete it, well, what does that mean? Right? So in those scenarios, what talk about here is if you read it further into the requirements document as well as the design specification, you're not deleting any information. All you're doing is flagging it to make it inactive. Okay. Okay. So when you go to the next section, Herschel, 2.6, so this is another way to represent the same level of information which was present in section 2.5, right? It just talks about, hey, what all functions each of the users types can do it, and is that dependent on some other functions? So for example, the dealer users, when they submit the credit application, it's going to depend on the email workflow notification, right? So nobody's accessing email workflow notification directly, but it gets triggered by another function in the system. And you can see it, the same thing happens when a lender user either approves or rejects the application. Okay. So when you look at that, here are the different functions, and here is how the users access them to. All right.
I have a question, Dilip.
Go ahead.
Who defines the functionality? Means what site administrator will do, what the regional manager will do, or is it like we, I mean, as a tester, we sit with the business and we decide, or they give the specification, or what?
So typically business users provide that specification to whoever is collecting the requirement. So normally if you are working in the waterfall model, typically you will have a project manager and the business analysts who will sit down with the business users and collect that information. And then they pass on to you. If you're working it more in an agile environment, then you are also sitting most likely with the business analyst at the table when the business users are providing that information. So think about what I said earlier, right? This is the document that's requirement that is provided to you. Now you may be at the table while this information is collected and captured. Sometimes you may not be at the table, but your responsibility is to review that and apply those 3C and the T criteria to see if it makes sense or if there are information that are missing, then you identify and then you try to get that information from the business users, right? And sometimes you just flag that, hey, here is the information which is missing to your project manager or the business analyst, and then they will go and interact with the business users and collect that on your behalf.
Okay.
In this, they didn't mention about the area manager, and also area manager should deal with the dealers.
Right. So those are the kind of things, right? So
Yeah.
again, going back to it, two aspects, right? Is this information incomplete? Probably not, right? Because they already provided you a table and then they provide a subset view of it. So you should focus on it as having a discussion, say, hey, I already have that. Is there any contradictory information? So in other words, if they say it's site administrator have some specific function in this diagram, but when you look back at the table above, there is no such information. So then that's when you start questioning is, hey, there is an inconsistency. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Because that's where you're looking for it, is any contradictory information.
Plus anything that doesn't make sense to you, that's something you should bring that up and get clarified. Okay.
Okay. So now this section talks about the functional modules. Remember, like it's section 2.3 talked about what are the business processes and how it interacts. This particular section talks about, hey, I had 6 different functional modules that was done as part of the functional decomposition. Well, what are the requirements for each one of the modules? So this one talks about, hey, what are the things that I'm bound to understand it when I'm managing the dealer shop? So for example, right, the business process talks about, hey, each dealer, when they are created, they should get a unique franchise number. This module now then talks about it is, hey, what does that unique franchise number means? Right? Is it going to be entered manually by somebody? Or it's going to be auto-generated? So in this case, it says that, hey, you know what we talked about in that business process, a unique franchise number associated with the dealer? Well, this is how it gets generated when somebody creates a new dealer. It is kind of auto-generated by the system, but the system uses the information provided by the RFREP around the what state, what county this dealer is located at. And based on that, here is how the dealer franchise number is created. So that's an example. Also, another thing is, hey, when I'm managing the dealer shops, well, what if I want to update or see if this dealer exists in the system or not? That means I should be able to do some sort of searching. I should be able to validate the data around it. And those are the kind of requirements that are specified. Right. One of the key things at the bottom is when you look at the requirement number 1.6, it says it's not only that I create a dealer once, but whenever I'm visiting it, I have an ability to capture the notes about that dealer. Okay. Any questions? What I'm looking for it is, and I'm talking more around the structure, right? Because whenever you're going to read any requirements document, this are the kind of structural information that you need to look for it in order to put all of the pieces of the puzzle together. So Herschel, if you can like scroll it down, you're going to see it the similar organization here, like what you saw it earlier in the section 2.3, that there's going to be a specific subsection for each one of the functional modules, which talks about how they are managing each one of them.
Another question.
Uh-huh.
So on this, let me see, on the requirement 1.1, so the user must be able to search existing dealer by the dealer name. Who is the user here we are referring to, please?
So that's where you have to go back to the
Okay.
modules that where we had. It says who all are able to do the dealer shop, managing the dealer shop, right?
Yeah. Okay.
If I'm a lender user, can I do that? I can't, right?
No. Yeah.
So we look into this table, right? So managing dealer can be done by either super user, RFREP, area manager, or regional manager. So
But
when we
not
talk
lender.
about the user, these are the four different types of user can perform that functionality that was defined in section 261.
Okay.
So if I'm a dealer, will I search myself by my name? Probably won't, right? So that's where those two gaps is that dealer and lender cannot do that thing. So you need to, as a quality assurance person, when you are testing the requirements mentioned in section 2.6.1, you also want to test it as, hey, if I log in as a lender user, can I perform any of these functions? And the answer should be no.
But I think it's a good question. Okay, this question, I think you are thinking ahead, which is good.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Not, I'll move on here.
I have a question. What
Go
is
ahead.
the last column? Business rule cross reference.
So if you look at it, right, we identified in the section 2.5, which was blank, there are specific business rules that goes across the project. Since we didn't have any, there is no business rules cross-reference defined here. So the way you need to think about it is every company has templates, and they use that template to populate the requirements document. And some of the information and some of the templates may be not applicable, right?
Yes.
So that's what this is referring. It's when there is no data, then you want to say, hey, is it not applicable or is it missing information? And since there was nothing defined in section 2.5, you can just say, hey, this is not applicable.
Okay.
Okay, that's a good catch though. And again, the structure is same, right? So when I'm managing users, there are 10 specific things that I need to think about it in terms of functionality. And that's what it's laid it out here. Now, this is where you should also further apply the 3C and T rule and says, they say it's that username is auto-generated based on first name and last name. Can I test that? Is it complete? Is it correct? To have all the information to generate the username based on the data that I have.
Yep, we'll take a look at more closely on Sunday, I think.
Yep.
How you can dissect the requirements.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. So if you go, Harshal, unless anybody has any questions, I would say it's, let's talk through it at the end of section 266.
Okay.
Any
questions for the entire section 2.6 before we get
yes,
into?
I do have only one question about a 2.6.3.
Okay.
What is a EMI stand for? EMI business problem 2.
So that's kind of a mapping back to the process, business processes. So when they talk about, like, it's if you look into it, all of the functional modules, they are like, it's kind of tied to the business processes. And the business process is specified as the EMI dot business process 2. So the businesses usually have their own catalog of all the business processes. And then all they're talking about is, hey, this particular module is related to this particular business process. So they typically try to make sure that everything is tracked from the time that they define the business processes to what is going to happen into the system. So they may have a whole bunch of additional business processes that may not touch the system.
Yes,
okay.
and I can clarify it here though. So I think somebody made a copy paste mistake, and that happens, right? I mean, folks copies the section and then try to add the requirement specific to the loan calculator or submit credit application, but they probably forgot to update this section here. It's supposed to refer back to the business process, whatever ID is assigned to the business process. And that's what it's supposed to be here. But I guess if you notice it, right, everywhere it's EMI, BP2, BP2. So they probably forgot to update. So, but it's a good catch. So it should be, there should be unique number associated with every process.
Okay.
Okay. You understood, right? What this one, what
Yes.
this, yeah. So that if I go back here in the business process section, you have ARF BP3, right? For managed lender. You should have ARF BP2. So whatever requirement, detailed requirement you are specifying for this business process. So this number or ID should be associated with those sections. But again, it looks like it's a copy paste mistake.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
It's again, remember, like it just, as Arshil said, right? It will refer back to the business process in the document. And sometime it may also refer back to a business processes that may not be tied
that's
to the
correct.
system.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
So the next section talks about what are the training and support requirements, right? So a lot of times when you build the system and when you roll out the systems, there is a training requirement before the users can start using that system. And there are some systems where it's kind of, hey, you may have a help functions already available in the system itself so that you don't need to go through the training. Okay, so that's what it talks about. Hey, is there any specific training requirement or not? And then the next section talks back to the reporting requirement, right? So as we mentioned, while we were in the report section of the table, at every level, it's going to have a little bit different ability to view it, right? So the first section is the agents and reps, which are individual people at the bottom of the food chain. They're going to be able to see only the dealership that they serve it and they support it. Versus if you go down further, then area district managers is going to have an additional level of all of the reps underneath that individual that can be seen it. But if you see it, the right 4 columns, they are exact same as the area reps. So they should be able to go ahead and drill it down detail. Same thing when you go to the regional managers, there are like, it's kind of a further level of breakdown of the area managers. And then when you go to the super users, who is potentially at arfloan.com site, they are able to see it, every region, every area manager, every rep. So that ends pretty much a functional requirement section. Remember, like it's when we started talking, there's going to be 2 levels of requirements. One is functional, which is what are the capabilities I can do it in the system. And the second section is going to be a non-functional requirement, which talks about the operational characteristic of the system. So the section 3 here talks about operational characteristics. So if you look at it, 3.1, it talks about, hey, everything that happens with a credit application needs to be tracked and audited in the system. So when you look into any financial systems, anything you do it, whether you add it, update it, or delete anything, all of that gets tracked because of the government rules and regulation requirements. So that's all they are specifying here, that, hey, since this system has ability to create a credit applications and make changes to it, we want to make sure that any changes anybody makes it gets captured into the system as the audit trail. Okay. Same thing goes with the exception processing. Hey, what happens whenever there are error happens? What kind of messages, who should do it, those kind of things. Then the next one is availability, which talks about what are operational hours during which system should be available. Now, you're always going to have a different level depending on the system you're building it, right? Some system may be 24/7 versus some systems, hey, I don't need it 24/7. It needs to be up only during the normal business operating hours. So in this case, they are specifying the requirement that, hey, since I could be potentially using it across different time zones, I'm going to make a system available from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock Eastern time. So because 10 o'clock Eastern is about 7 p.m. on the Pacific coast. Okay. Then the next section talks about the scalability, right? So it talks about, hey, what should be the characteristics of the system? So there are two different levels, right? One is how many total number of users should be able to use the system versus how many users should be able to use the system at the same time. So this goes back to the things that we talked about when we talk about the multi-tier architecture, right? Things like if I'm building an Amazon or 911 systems, right? I need to make it sure that, hey, everybody can access it. One of the biggest failure, and I don't know if you read any report or you had a personal experience or not, but when 911 event happened in New York, pretty much all of the 911 or emergency dial system was overwhelmed. So people were not able to use it. That goes back to the scalability requirement, right? It was originally scalability requirement that only about 10% of the population will be logging it or dialing 911 at any given time, versus a huge number of people getting into it. So this one talks about that, hey, my system should be able to hold up to 500 users with a concurrency rate of about 10%. So at any given point, about 10% of the users will be logged into the system, and that's what the system should be able to perform against it. Okay. And then the second one talks about, hey, over the 3 years, how many users it's going to grow, right? So initially they said, hey, I'm going to have a 500 users, and that's going to grow to 150%. So it's going to grow to 750 users over the next 3 years. Okay. Then the next one talks about the accessibility and performance, which talks about, hey, from where all I can access the system, which in this case, remember, like it's even if you go back into the constraint earlier in the beginning of the document, it says that system should be accessible from internet. So that's what this is specifying it. Then the next one talks about the performance. What should be the performance or response time when the user performs certain functions, right? So there's going to be two different things that is specified here. One is a real-time transactions. And they said, if I'm doing a real-time transactions, make sure I can go to the next step within less than 2 seconds, 99% of the time. Versus if I'm generating a report, probably it's going to, I understand that it's going to be pull a whole bunch of data and it's going to take a little bit more time. So they just say it's, hey, even if I generate the reports, it should be generated in less than a minute. Okay. All right, Arshil, if you can scroll it down.
Okay.
Then the next sets of requirement talks about failover and the recovery and a backup. Right? So every data which talks about what happens if my system or hardware over which it's running it fails, what should be the behavior of the system, right? So you can think about if it's a business critical systems, then typically they want to make sure, hey, if I fail it, I should have an alternate place where it automatically fails over. So like, for example, as I will go back to 911 systems, right? If a given system fails, you should have a redundancy so that it automatically fails over to other server where the same system is running, because you can't afford it to give the message to somebody who's calling for 911 emergency. Hey, system is not available, call back later. Think about for a moment, if you get a message with 911 system like that. Okay. But in this case, our system is not very critical, right? If I'm trying to like check an application status for a given customers, and if it's not available, it's okay that if you give a message that check back later in an hour, right?
Okay.
And then the next one talks about the recovery, right? What happens if your system fails or machine gets corrupted? How often the data is backed up, so that tells you, hey, if at the most I'll lose a 1 day's worth of data, and then system can go back to the state in which it was previous night, because I do it data backup every night. Some of them may be an instance, right? So think about it. If I'm doing a banking system, I don't want to like it's back up only till the last night's data, right? What if I deposited the money or perform some transactions? I don't want to lose it. So those cases, your backup requirement will be till the last actual transaction type of thing.
Okay.
Let's go to the next section. So
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm kind of curious on, you kind of talk a little bit about business rule cross-reference, but we never saw an example of UAT cross-reference. Can you tell me a little bit more on what does it stands and when does it comes into play in this type of scenario?
So again, as I mentioned, right, these are the templates. In a lot of times, this information doesn't get yet populated because you're still in the analysis phase. So you haven't written any test cases.
Okay.
The user hasn't defined any test cases. What you will see it as we actually start using the tools, that the tools have ability to capture back, hey, if I'm trying to like it's look for this system requirement, well, what user acceptance test cases are validating this requirement? So that's the reference in here. And the reason why it's mostly empty, because you are still in the requirement phase. You haven't written any test cases, so there's no way you can reference back.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay.
Again, I'll let you read through it if you have any question on section 3.9 through 3.13. Those are the standard one that explains you what compliance should be there, what is the disaster recovery, from where all I can access it in terms of network requirements, and what standards I need to follow or I'm exempted from.
Dilip,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
In 3.8, backup and recovery.
Right.
In that, they're telling disaster recovery will follow standards for Tier 3 application here. And in a system design document in 2.8, they're telling it's a 2-tier application. Why?
No, so those two are different, right? So when you look into it, it's not 2-tier, it's a multi-tier application, right?
Okay.
That's an architecture diagram versus what is talking in the backup and recovery. At the industry level, there is standards. What they call it is tier 1, 2, 3, and 4 applications. And each of the applications is categorized into one of those tier based on criticality. So for example, if you have an application that requires a backup and recovery all the way to the last possible moment, they are going to be tier 1, right? Because your testing is going to be different in those cases that, hey, did I recover every data that happened just a few seconds ago? Versus if something requires, hey, I'm going to go ahead and disaster recover only to the last 4 hours type of thing window. Versus tier 3, it is essentially, hey, I'm going to recover it till the last night, but it's going to take me a week for recovering it, right? So in the event when failure happens, how long I have it before I have to recover the system. That determines the level of the tier for that particular application. And it is closely tied to the amount of hardware I need to purchase it, the amount of the investment I need to put it in terms of financial to support that system. If something is like it's tier 3, what it says, hey, it is okay if the system is down for a couple of days, nobody's life or death is going to be relying on it, right? So you can take a time to recover it. Versus if it is a financial system and a system goes down, you can't wait for 3 days to recover the data, right? Because people still need an access to their money. They still need an access to their accounts to perform transactions. Okay, so what Harshal is pointing it out, right? So if you look into it, there is a tier 3 in the disaster recovery. The same level of tier is required in the recovery. Right?
No, I
so
think
that's what
go ahead.
So when you look into 3.8 and 3.10, there are more or less kind of exact same requirements.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I think what you saw in the system design document, right? So sometimes what happens is when they collect the requirement, they think tier 3 application, business agrees to that. But think about this is going to be in the cloud and on the Azure platform, which automatically comes with tier 2 type of basically support. So in the system design, they could mark it as a tier 2 instead of tier 3. So tier 2 meaning it can recover within a day instead of tier 3 the business was expecting. So actually business is getting more value with this architecture and the platform for this application. So sometimes it could differ. They could change the tiers in the design based on what they find out or what they design later on.
Okay. Yeah, Harshal, thanks for clarifying. I initially thought her question was related to the architecture diagram,
right.
And then that. So thanks for clarifying that. As you said, like it's certain platforms, it's inherently going to come with certain additional, I would say, is the benefits or a level of standards, and those standards may be higher than that. So from a business point of view, they expected tier 3. But at the price and the architecture they were using it, they got a better benefit than that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
All right. So Harshal, if you can keep scrolling. So then the next section is about the signatures, right? So what it indicates that, hey, I'm done specifying most of the requirements. It's done. This is the agreement when you read it. Do you understand that? So this becomes, if you think about more or less kind of a baseline that both business and IT uses to talk about the system and says, hey, is it done? All the requirements, that means it's everything specified here. Now, if you scroll down a little bit more further, Harshal, there is also an appendix in here, which talks about, hey, how are the different business data and attributes are related? And then that's the reference that was done earlier. So if you look into it, there are different entity, which essentially who are the key concepts used in the system, or whether it's a dealer, lender, or users, and how they relate to each other is what it's specified here. And then the last 2 pages gives you a rough screenshot. So it gives you an idea how they're expecting it to be laid out. Now, some of those gives you an understanding of how the information should be organized. But again, those things could change as the system starts getting into the design phases. Okay.
Okay.
Here, can I ask you a question? What is that CBC stand for?
CVC.
When you can see the PDF printable application in the third blue block next to it.
Third blue
Go
block.
down.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Here you are
The-
saying, okay.
Yes, enter app data portals to CBC and the shop logs into CBC, enters the application data. What is that CBC? Is that a credit bureau center?
Data portals to CBC and shop logs into CBC and enters application data. I guess that's what they were calling the name of the portal, the CBC.
Okay.
That's what they utilized that terminology. Yep.
Okay.
But I don't think it's clarified anywhere in the document, right?
Yes, yes.
Yep. Yep. But looks like they are referring to the portal where the
Okay.
data they will enter and how it's structured on the pages. So
Oh,
here
okay.
on this, right, this is how the pages will be structured. It's kind of like a high level because they don't have design yet, but this is how they agreed with the user. Okay, we will have a home page, we'll have some dealer page where dealer can do some calculation here. Then there will be some type of a loan application where they can actually, dealer can actually go in and enter the loan application and so forth. So these are kind of like a mock-up. Somebody probably drew it on a piece of paper and they put it in a digital format for business user to communicate with the business user.
Okay.
Sometimes the sketches can be more detailed. So you might actually see the screen layouts. This is how it's supposed to look and so forth. But again, it goes back to the different type of requirements and so forth, how detailed information you will get. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So that's kind of system requirements document. Right.
Okay.
And then you should see it at the end. There is a application PDF, which was referred into the document earlier in the business process for managing credit application.
Yeah, if you ever applied for a loan, this section should be familiar to you guys. So it's applicant, co-applicant, pretty standard information they are collecting for a loan application. So. Okay.
So then second thing we had asked you is to read through the system design document. So if you think about it, essentially when the requirements analysis phase happens in the SDLC lifecycle, the business analyst work closely with the end business users to capture what is the desire of the businesses. And then they take that information and give it to the development team, which could be an architect, it could be a lead developer, who essentially takes that information and creates a design document of saying that this is how the system needs to be built. Okay, going back into the house example or home example that I was talking about earlier in the class session 1, think of it if you decide that, hey, I want to build a house and you identify the requirements, based on that, then they will define a structural blueprint of this is how the house is going to be built. It's exact same concept. So this document is usually created by the development team, right? Not necessarily quality assurance person, but this also helps you to understand how the system is going to build, which is then going to fulfill the requirements document that was laid it out in the previous document. Okay, so let's go through this thing. And you should see a lot of similarities in this document for certain sections. So for example, the overview sections, it's more or less kind of exactly same as the overview section in the requirements document. It tries to set the context. Then when you go into it, they identify, hey, what are going to be the system characteristics? How the system is going to be built? What is the performance? So like it's, for example, if you look into some of this information is carried from the requirements document. And that's where you need to be carefully look into it to identify if there is any discrepancies, right? So for example, when you look at it, annual anticipated user growth rate per year is 30% here in section 3C, versus when you look into the system's requirement document, it was mentioned that it's going to grow to 150% over 3 years, right? So those are the kind of things that now you start flagging it into a requirements document says, hey, this is not consistent now. Do you want me to design and test it for 30% of user growth, or do you want to do it 150% over 3 years, which roughly comes about 50% a year? Okay. Same thing with the maximum concurrent user and all. So those are the characteristics that you look through it. So here, when you see it, the usage period, it's still like it's 6 to 10 in the extended business hours. It also identifies the availability requirements and the business recovery tier. So this is where I think, Sri, you were referring earlier, it's a tier 3 versus tier 2. Because of the architecture which it is using it, you are able to provide a higher tier level than the lower one. Then it talks about what are the regulatory impact. Since this contains credit information, so people's social security number as well as the other financial, it requires you to utilize the standard which is called as personally identifiable information, or a PII information. Okay. So those are the kind of things that it talks about it. So as a quality assurance person, some of them may not make sense because it's a technical jargons for you that you may not care much, but you also need to look through it to make sure that is there any inconsistency from a systems requirement document to this one. Then the next section talks about the architectural driver. So essentially, what is driving the decision for you to use a one specific architecture versus the other one? So when we looked at through the various architectures, if you recall it, we started with the monolithic world and went all the way to the mobile world. And so what is the reasoning behind the design team to select certain architecture, one side of architecture versus the other, is kind of documented here. And then, so when you look at the given driver and says, hey, there's going to be notification, send it to both lenders and dealers. Therefore, I need to interact with the email system, right? So the driver and what are the implications? Same thing when you look into the section number 3. Well, in the requirements document, they said that, hey, we prefer it to deploy to Windows Azure platform. Therefore, we're going to use this particular architecture. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Then
Are we actually mapping everything from the requirement to design?
You should definitely map the level of information provided in each so that you can identify any inconsistency or any gaps.
Now, remember the design is geared towards more for the developers and not for the QAs. Okay, so it's okay if you don't understand the technical terms, certain terminologies, or certain non-functional requirements, because there are specialized QAs like performance testers. They actually do the performance testing, which this tests about number of user loads and scalability and all kind of things, but they are specialized QAs. What you typically focus on in the real world projects is functional testing. So the functional components, what we talked about, the business processes and the functional business requirements, that's what typically you will do day in and day out, 95% of the time. Now, as you grow in your career, you might pick up some specialized skills like performance testing. There are specialized tools and so forth. So you will pick that up. But as a beginner, you focus on the functional testing side further.
Thanks.
Okay.
It explains a lot. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So now when you look at these 2.3, right, that diagram should look more or less kind of familiar to the system context diagram that was kind of put it into the system requirements document, right? How the transaction flows through it, how the system interacts with which type of users. And the same thing goes with the next section, which is around the system function diagram. In the form diagram, it essentially talks about how the system is going to interact. So this one should look very familiar with the 3-tier architecture and some of the web-based architecture that we talked about. Then there is a security consideration, what kind of security it's going to be used in, right? And this is useful for you is when you start testing this system, then you know, hey, how the password is going to be provided. Is it going to be token-based, biometric-based, or just a normal password? In this case, they just said, hey, it's going to be a normal password, which is going to be Active Directory-based. Okay. Same thing, some of those are technical jargons around what are the external process it's going to interact so that you identify the dependencies. And then the authorization and security role. So this is where you should be able to map this information back to the requirements document and make sure it's consistent. Okay. Then it's normal data retention and the non-functional requirements, how it's going to follow. And then you get into the application context diagram. So this diagram here specifically talks about the input and output to the system. So if you look at it, there is no users, right? What data goes into the system and what data comes out of the system. And then you have functional decomposition. Essentially, how the development team is planning to implement the system is what it's kind of laid it out here. They're going to say, hey, they're going to build a security manager, which is going to validate some of the managed user functionality. And then that will interact then with the loan calculator or credit application processor or report processor and so on. Okay. And then the next one talks about the data aspects of it. So what is the logical model? So they're going to further refine what was defined into the Appendix A model in the requirements document. And then they get into, hey, for each one of them, what is the exact detail? So for example, when they talk about a user, well, what all field user contains it, what are the type, and whether it's a required or non-required field, right? Okay. So this gives you a good idea in terms of, hey, if I'm trying to create a user, what all pieces of information I need to make sure that the user is providing it to create it. So when you start doing testing of those features and functionality, what is the minimum? What are the optional fields? All that data that you can get it from here to build your test cases. And we'll build it, some of them, as we go through it over the next 3-4 weeks.
Okay.
Any questions? And you can see it like it's all the different entity fields are like it's kind of done it.
So dealers, lenders, notes, since you are capturing the notes for dealers. So that information is there. Credit application is also there with a lot of information they are capturing as part of it.
Is page 56, because I don't have the hard copy, I'm just seeing here the page 56. Is it like a database?
Page 56, what's the title on that?
It takes some time to.
56, right? Hang on.
Yep.
Give me a second. Are you talking about this one, this diagram, ER model?
Yeah, it's not database. It's what they call it as an entity model. So essentially just gives you an information of how the information between the dealer and credit application is related and how the information between lenders and credit application is related. And what is the relationship between the dealers and the users and lenders and the users?
So essentially, it will tell you how the information will be organized in the database, in the technical terminology. Yeah, this is how they are planning to organize. They might have a credit application table created, dealer table, lenders, and they will all the fields that goes along with dealers that we saw will be stored within this data table, I guess. And what are the relationships here?
Yeah.
We'll talk about in the SQL session. We'll have that, and we'll cover some of this portion. Yep.
Yeah. All this type of diagram is known as an entity relationship diagram, right?
Yep.
Now it's used it for information architecture as well as Harshal pointed out, it uses for the creating the database and organizing and storing information in the database.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Then this one, the section 5.2 then talks about if a system integrates with any external systems, how are they integrating it? What's the external systems? What are the interaction going in? In this case, the only external system is the email notification. Everything else is within the system. So then it talks about what architecture they're going to use it. So this is what I was referring earlier, that, hey, this is a multi-tier architecture where you talk about the data tier is broken into 2 segments. And you have a presentation tier and you have a business logic tier. In the last slide or last page talks about, hey, how is the structure of the application is going to be laid out. So when you can just say it's, hey, all of the dealer site administrator as well as the lenders, when they log in, they're going to land into their home pages, which is going to be different, right? Because they are each one have access to different functionality. And from there, what all the other functions they can navigate or access to it. And then how that information gets transitioned into the database. So if you think about it, right? So a dealer can, from their homepage, they can go ahead and do it either loan calculations, or they can submit a new credit applications, or they can check the loan status for an existing credit application, right? So that's where you see it, the flow, it's happening that. Now, some of the administrator, they are able to perform the dealer functionality also. So when they try to like it say, hey, I want to go into manage the dealer related things, then you can just go back there and manage all those things. Right now, the reason why you'd ask a question, hey, they can do it with the dealer, but why can't they do it with the lender? So if you recall it, right, as a site administrator, I still can't approve or reject credit application. Therefore, there is no link going from a site administrator into the lender user functionality. Okay.
I think this diagram is important for you guys to keep it handy. I'm sure you guys will refer back to this diagram when we actually dive into the QA side of things.
So that's in a nutshell is the 2 documents, right? Do you have any questions of any of the documents? Okay, so if you don't have any question, this is what I would recommend between now and Saturday. In the light of the conversation that we had it today, and I'm seeing that Harshal is recording this session also, that he will make you available sometime tomorrow. Once you look through it, go back and reread it. And then now that you understand a little bit of structure, go through it, reference again, try to see it if there is anything that you missed it from 3C and T, but also trying to understand how the system is going to be designed to be worked so that when you start writing the test cases, you can predict it, what should be the flow and how you should go about testing things.
Yeah, specifically who is performing the work, like who are the users and who is doing the work for each individual section, right? Kind of like we talked about dealers, who is doing the work, who can, and how they are performing the work, what are the things they can do. So try to understand that, try to create a picture, because there are different users, right? What they can do within the system, and the business rule or the requirements will tell you what are the rules or what are the things they are allowed to do and how the system's supposed to behave. That understanding is very important as a QA. So spend some time on the both requirements document for sure and design document as well. You might have to go through twice requirements document by the time we start actually on the quality assurance or actual test cases and other things.
I have one question.
Sure.
In the table, like the logical data entities, so we have the users like the dealers, lenders, credit application. But what is that node? Means what kind of user is that?
So that's a kind of a generic user. So Harshal, if you can just jump into the system design document into that entity table.
It's 13 of 27, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's on the second segment, right? So I think it's about this one, Harshal. I think the user is first and then there is credit application.
Yeah.
Oh, so users
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me go.
So when you look into that, right, all they're just saying is that, hey, you know what? I'm not going to create a different table for different types of user. I'm going to have one generic user table, and there is a user type, which is going to identify, hey, what type of this user is. Is this a dealer user or a lender user or site administrator, etc.
Or our prep or a general manager.
Right. So, and if you read through the text, right, it will tell you that, hey, certain fields are required for certain type of user, but they are not required for the other users. So for example, lender ID, it's required for lender user type, versus dealership ID is required if I'm creating a dealer user type. Right? So they're identifying the rules as, hey, I'm not going to have so many different user tables. I'm going to just have a user type, and anything which is specific to that user type, I'll just populate it in there. And those data will be empty for other user types.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes.
Okay.
On I guess page number 13th of 27 for the second one.
Yeah,
system design.
Yes, that's the one. I guess we are on the same page. Yes,
Okay.
yes, perfect. Yes, you can see the active flag. I want to just understand that one. That indicates where user is active in the system, and only active users are allowed to log on. What does that mean? Only active users are allowed to log on.
So one of the things that you will see it as a behavior in a lot of systems, and the system is no different, is you can create the user IDs and the password. But after certain times, think about it, I've been working at one dealership. So my account was created, and then I decided to leave that dealership and go somewhere else. They don't want to lose the transactions that are associated with my user ID because it's still part of the dealership. So what they do is they usually it's flag it that, hey, you know what? These users are no longer able to log into the system. But we're going to maintain all the data for that because there is an audit requirement also. So if a user has created a credit application, then I want to make sure that that relationship stays in the system and not get deleted. But at the same time, I need to prevent that user who is no longer with this dealership from logging into the system. And the easiest way they do it is they said, hey, you know what? I'm going to identify who all are still active users versus if that flag is off, that means that user information is still in the system, but they can't log in. So they can't do anything else in the system.
Okay.
So it can be true or false. Okay. Boolean. So you have to look at the data type, which is a Boolean. Boolean meaning true or false. So if the user is active or not, that's what the information is stored in that field for the user.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think we will cover some of these types as well as part of the SQL session. Yep.
Okay.
Arcel, can you repeat what did you say about Boolean again one more time, please?
So this is more of a technical term, right? So when you are storing the data, you have different data types. So like you like social security number, right?
Mhm.
If that is a number, we all know it, and you can store that as a number in the database or in the data table in the whatever storage you have. If your name, we all know it's a text field. It's alphanumeric, right? So it's a text field. But when you are talking about the true or false or 1 or 0 type of values, there is
Okay.
a special type in the database world which is called Boolean,
Okay.
where if you assign this type to active flag field in the database, then only thing you can store is whether it's a 1 or 0.
Okay.
Typically,
Whether
1
it's
means true and 0 means false
Okay.
type of thing.
All
Okay.
right. Copy that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other question? Hopefully this session helps you guys, gives you more clarity around requirements and design. And as a QA, you are dealing with the requirement. You will have to deal with the requirements. So more things you pick up, more terminology you pick up. And what I would suggest is if you don't understand certain terminology, maybe Google it, right? I mean, that's the best way to learn it, because every project will be different, and you will have to pick up certain terminologies. May not be all the technical terms, but if you are familiar with it, that's a plus. So I would suggest try to do research as well on certain words if you don't understand, or bring it up here, and we'll discuss it as well. Okay, so
Only
if you guys, yeah, go ahead.
one more thing.
Sure.
On entity, the dealer section, the page number 15 on 27, I guess you need to scroll down.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, that's the one. What is that EFT bank name at the bottom of the table?
Here,
Yes, what is that EFT stand for?
it's
Maybe it's
electronic
a
fund transfer, right? In the financial world, you have electronic fund transfer, or
okay.
you can call it a ACH, is a different terminology, basically. So this one is electronic fund transfer. That's what it is. That's what it says
Okay.
here.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
It's account number, routing number, and
Yes.
so forth, right?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so this type of things, right? You can certainly bring it up, but if you forget, if you are at home, maybe Google it up, and you will find this. What is EFT? And you will come across that as well.
I think if you do any transaction or transfer in ICICI Bank, our Indian banks, you can connect NEFT, I think.
Yep, that is correct. That is correct. It's mainly electronic fund transfer, so it is used. That's the name. Any bank will do that. Yep. Okay, so I think we can close it today then, if you guys don't have any other question, and meet on Saturday morning, 8:45. That's our time. So.
Sure, thank you.
All right then. Okay, and those who are logging online, make sure you log in by 8:50. I think we will start sharp at 9, just in case if you guys run into any issues. Okay.
Also, one more question.
All right, thank you.
Go ahead.
And we need a laptop for the next class, right?
No, you will not need a
not for
laptop.
that.
Not
Okay.
for this weekend. Okay.
All right. Sounds good.
We'll do a lot of paper exercise and so forth. So, yep.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
All righty.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye bye.